Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today. My name is Linda Williams. I am a community outreach and training manager with Consumer Action. I would like to thank you for joining us for today's events on Nationwide Specialty Consumer Reports. And today's webinar is part of a series of webinars that Consumer Action will be hosting in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So mark your calendar for a series of webinars that we're going to have coming up in June. For an example, on June 9th, we will host a webinar on fair housing in the COVID-19 era. And on June 23rd, we're going to host a webinar on COVID-19 scams and healthcare fraud. I should note that our work on the COVID-19 Crisis Education Project is made possible by a grant from Wells Fargo. We want to thank Wells Fargo for its support. Now, before we get started, I have a few housekeeping tips for you. You can use the question function to answer your question. Our team will be monitoring your questions and they will be presented to me at the end of the webinar. You can also ask your questions on Twitter. Our handle is at Consumer Action, or you can use the hashtag Specialty Consumer Reports or hashtag CA Webinars. You are invited to join us on Twitter following the webinar. Nelson Santiago and I will be there for about 30 to 45 minutes to network with you and to answer any lingering questions that you may have. So we really hope that you would join us after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. I have a ton of resources for you. All of the handouts will be placed in a Dropbox and made available after the webinar. However, you will need to go onto our website to download a copy of our Specialty Consumer Reports fact sheet. Why? Because we want you to go to our website. We want you to go to our website and browse and take a look at all of the different resources that we made available for you that you can download free. During the webinar, we will launch about 4 poll questions. I am really interested in your response, so please, please, please participate. And at the end of the webinar, we will send you a survey. It would be greatly appreciated if you would complete the survey and return it back to us as soon as possible. Now, before we get started on specialty consumer reports, I want to tell you what it is that we do. Consumer Action is a national nonprofit. We have served consumers since 1971. At Consumer Action, we enjoy national reputation for creating multilingual consumer education materials in the field of credit, banking, privacy, insurance, and utilities, all of those kitchen table, pocketbook budgeting issues that impact you, your family, your neighbors, and the communities that you serve. We are a 501c3 organization. Like most 503c organizations, we're supported by grants and by membership donation. And for the price of $25 a year, you can become a member of Consumer Action. It would help us continue some of the great work that we are doing. And your tax deductible donation will entitle you to a subscription to our quarterly newsletter. Now, at the end of the webinar, there will be some information about how you can make a donation to Consumer Action if you're interested. But let's get into the presentation today. Taking a look at the agenda, we're going to discuss what specialty consumer reports are and the kind of information they collect, who can see your specialty consumer report, when and how you should request a copy of your report, the types of reports, and how to dispute any inaccurate information that's in your report. Let's get started by taking a look at the industry. Now, the consumer data industry, generally referred to as the credit reporting agencies, what is it that they do? They collect, they maintain, and they provide information to company about the behavior of consumers when consumers participate in the market in various financial transactions. The companies, in turn, when they receive that information, they use it to screen consumers when they apply for a financial product for risk to determine whether or not that consumer is likely to default on a product. Now, When most consumers think about credit reporting agencies, they are thinking about likely one of the big three, your Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. But there are actually other players out there lurking in the dark, hiding in the dark like Freddy Krueger. But most consumers don't have a clue that these agencies exist, let alone that they are collecting and selling information about them. For an example, you submit your application to rent a new house or a new apartment. Someone looks at something other than that rental application and that credit report to determine if you're going to get those keys. You just graduated from college. You have student loans you need to pay back. But when you apply for that entry level job that you've been looking at since you were a freshman in college, the employer looks at something other than your resume to get a better picture of who you are and how well you work and play with others before letting you in the door. You buy a new house. You apply for homeowners insurance. The insurance company uses information that you're not aware of that you didn't get before escrow closed to determine whether or not they're going to insure that particular house. Well, welcome to the world of nationwide specialty consumer reports under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and I am going to talk about the Fair Credit Reporting Act a lot today. There's a special category of consumer reporting agencies, and unlike the big three, these agencies are not concerned about your payment history, the amount of debt you owe, or how long you've had credit. These agencies are more concerned about specific types. These agencies have far more specific types of files about you. As the name suggests, these agencies are interested in your banking history, your check writing history, how often you use overdraft protection. If you bounce checks, how often you bounce checks, your medical and your prescription drug purchase history. Yeah, your prescription purchase history, your residential and your tenant history. Where have you lived for the last 5 years? How often have you been evicted? Your earning capacity, how often you use casino markers, those no interest loans that you use to gamble, and how well you pay back those casino markers. Are you using alternative financial products like payday loans? Are you using check cashing? Are you a serial returner? Do you take a lot of returns back to the store? Basically, if your name is attached to a transaction, then there's likely a specialty consumer reporting agency compiling information about it now. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, estimates that there are about 40 specialty consumer reporting agencies that are collecting, maintaining, and selling information about you right now. You may say, well, Linda, so what? Why does it matter? It matters because the greater reliance on these reports by landlords, by banks, insurance companies, and employers, the more that they rely on these products, you will potentially limit your access to financial products. And as my mother would say, to add insult to injury, what if the information in these files is incorrect? Just plain wrong. What if you are a victim of identity theft or mistaken identity, or you have one of those common names like Linda Williams? These companies could be peddling information that is used to make decisions about your future with incorrect and outdated information. And since you're not checking the reports, what you don't know can hurt you. Now, before we get into the different types of reports and when and how you should obtain a copy of your report, let me give you just a little bit of background information briefly so you'll know how we got here. Now, the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Bank published a white paper on the history of credit reporting agencies. And according to the paper, the first recorded group that shared credit information about consumers was named the Society of Guardians for the Protection of Trade Against Swindlers. I kid you not. It was founded in London in 1776. And just like a lot of our customs that hitched a ride on the Mayflower and came over to the United States, early credit reporting agencies in the United States went about to do that to protect U.S. trade against swindlers or individuals they perceived to be as swindlers. These early credit reporting agencies, they were small local organizations. They gathered sensitive and personal information about the consumer. These agencies will go as far as to scour local newspapers for notices of arrest, promotion, divorces, and items such as the consumer is a gambler or frequently drunk would be clipped and attached to the consumer's paper credit report. According to the white paper, even that local welcome wagon that came along with that little tuna casserole was working undercover for these agencies. But most important, there was no standards in place to evaluate a person's credit worthiness. Everything was totally based on the subjective whims and the prejudice of the gatekeepers of these files. Consumers were not allowed to see information that these agencies were collecting about them. There was no mechanism and time in place for a consumer to dispute any of the information, and there was no time limit on how long this information could stay in your file. Negative information generally followed the consumers to the grave. Well, all of that changed on April the 25th, 1971. Why? Because the Fair Credit Reporting Act became law. It became effective. And for the first time in our history, consumers were given a little power. Now, credit reporting agencies were really late and they resisted giving us this power, but the act gave consumers the right to find out what was in their credit file for the first time. They have outdated information, 7 to 10 years old, deleted so it didn't follow the consumers to the grave. And among other things, it gave consumers the right to receive notice when an adverse action, such as a denial of credit, insurance, or employment, was being taken against them because of information that was in those consumer files. Now, in 2003, Congress came back and they amended the Federal Credit Reporting Act, or FCRA, with the passage of FACTA. FACTA is the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act. FACTA gave consumers two great victories. First of all, FACTA required that each of the three credit reporting agencies provide free credit reports to every U.S. consumer every 12 months upon request. So to comply with the law, the big three came together and they created Central Source LLC. And Central Source set up a toll-free number, a mailing address, and a central website where consumers can go to submit their requests for credit reporting agencies. And this is when www.annualcreditreport.com was born. Another consumer-friendly provision of FACTA, and for the first time in our history, it designated these nationwide specialty consumer reporting agencies as reporting agencies with the exact same responsibility as the big three. And this was a big victory to consumers because these agencies had stayed hidden for years. They had stayed hidden for years, collecting and selling information about consumers, and they didn't have a clue. So just like the big three, these agencies were then required to give consumers free reports of all the information they were collecting on them every year. So in 2003, FACTA gave you the right to get free copies of your specialty consumer reports every year since 2003. How many of you are requesting and fact checking the accuracy of these reports? Now that you have a little bit background, let's take a look at let's let's take a look at who can see your consumer reports. As you can see on the screen, specialty consumer reporting agencies generally can provide your consumer report and risk score. Don't forget risk score to an array of different businesses, including those on the screen, including retail stores that accept personal check, companies that market and sell products specifically to low-income consumers or subprime credit applicants, debt buyers, debt collectors, gambling casinos that extend credit to consumers, or those that accept personal check, your payday, auto title lenders, those lenders that finance security deposits when individuals don't have enough money to put the security deposit down on their apartments. Again, although they must have a legitimate reason to do so, there are an array of different businesses that can take a look at your specialty consumer report. But the question is, are you looking at your report? Do you know what these agencies are saying about you? Now, before we move on to the next segment, as I indicated, I have about 4 poll questions, true or false, and I want to launch the first true or false question. So I need you to participate. So the question, specialty report users include insurance landlords. They must warn you in advance before taking adverse action against you based on information in the file. Is that true or is that correct? False. Is that true or is that false? Select one of the following. True or false? Okay, I'm gonna give you like 2 more seconds to select your true or false answer. Okay, let's see the results of the poll. Okay, so 31% is saying it's true, and 69% of you are saying it's false. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Well, actually, with the exception of employment background screening, users of specialty consumer reports generally do not warn you in advance that they are about to take adverse action on you based on information in your file. So, since employment background checks are the exception, let's take a look at the 2 types of reports that are commonly used by employers. And they are your employment background consumer report and your investigative consumer reports. Let's start by looking at the similarities between the 2 reports. Both are an evaluation of a consumer's risk profile, and both are governed by the Federal Credit Reporting Act and are generally used by employers who want to avoid hiring someone who may become a liability. Although, as you'll learn later on in the presentation, that insurance companies and landlords also use background checks. But the main difference between the 2 types of reports is the type of information that's collected and the source that's used to obtain the information. For an example, an employment background check can include information from a person's work history, their education, their credit history, their driving record, their criminal record, how they use social media. And the information can come from a variety of sources, including a credit report. In fact, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax create a special credit report for employment background checks. Information can come from a civil court case, from a motor vehicle check, education verification. They will also check the sex offenders database, military records. But in contrast, the investigative consumer report, it seeks information about an applicant's or employment character. It's not concerned whether or not the applicant and employee went to Yale or worked for Google. It's more concerned about the applicant's or employee's general reputation in the community, their personal characteristics or living style. And unlike the employment background check, the information is gathered through personal interviews with neighbors, with friends, with co-workers, with ex-wives or ex-husbands. So that's how that information is collected. There's another important difference between the 2 types of reports. Um, and you need to know this information, especially in this era of COVID-19, when the pool of candidates has is huge, with 3.4 million people being unemployed. Before an employer can conduct a background check on an applicant or an investigative check on an applicant, the Federal Credit Reporting Act requires the employer to take certain steps. First, with the background check, um, before an employer can obtain a background check on the employee and applicant, it must provide that employee and applicant with specific disclosures. Those disclosures must the applicant or the employee, that they're going to conduct a background check and that the information used in the report, it will be used for decision related to their employment. The notice must be in writing, and it also must be in a standalone format, meaning that the disclosure cannot be buried in a employment application or another document. And this standalone format is required under FCRA. Last January, Delta Airlines agreed to pay $2.3 million to settle a class action lawsuit for failing to provide 44,000 applicants with that standalone employment background disclosure. 2018, Frito Lay's and Target both settled lawsuits for the same violation. So not only must the employer tell the employee that I'm going to conduct this background check and the information is going to be used to decide whether or not I'm going to hire you. They must put the information in writing and in a standalone format. And the third thing that they must do is they must get the written consent, permission, authorization of the applicant or the employee. No consent, no report. They likely won't get the job, but no consent, no report. In addition, and I think this is one of the most important things, if an employer wants authorization that's going to allow him or her to get background reports on the employee throughout their employment, it must be what it must be told to the employee on the disclosure form. This is what the FTC call a rolling check. The employer must disclose, and it must be clearly stated that he or she will be conducting periodic background checks on the applicant once he or she is employed. So that's the employment background check. So when it comes to the investigative report, although the employer must follow similar steps, they must go a little bit beyond what they will do for an employment background check. For example, the employer must clearly disclose to the employee or applicant in writing that it's going to obtain an investigative report and that investigative report is going to contain information from personal interviews as to his or her character, general reputation, or personal characteristic. That employer must tell Joe Sixpack, look, Joe, I'm going to talk to your ex-wife. I'm going to interview your friends. I'm going to interview your neighbors. I'm going to interview everyone that know you. The employer must clearly disclose that. The other thing that's a little different from the employment background check with the investigative, the FCRA requires that an employer who wants to obtain an investigative consumer report must provide the employee or an applicant with two disclosure forms. They must provide the employer and applicant with an employment background disclosure form as well as the investigative disclosure forms. Yes, two forms. Now, if you asking me, can they put it all into one form just to cover all of their bases? The answer is absolutely no. Some employers have tried this to combine both disclosure forms in the past. In a case that was handed down last year in April in Mitchell versus Winco Foods, the court held that adding an investigative consumer report disclosure in an employment background report violated the standalone disclosure requirement. So now you know some of the steps that an employer must take if he or she wants to get an employment background check or an investigative report on the consumer. But here's the deal. The FCRA only covers background and investigative checks if prepared by an outside third party agency. If an employer decides not to hire a third party agency but conducts the investigation and compiles the report, he or she is not required to comply with the FCRA. And if you're looking for extra protection, this is where you need to look to state law for that extra protection. For an example, a California employer that wants to conduct a background or investigative check without using a third party consumer reporting agency still must use disclosure forms. They still must use disclosure forms in California. So let's say that ABC company hires Advantage Corp to do an employment background report on Joe Sixpack, and when doing the report, Advantage Corp found some negative information on Joe, and they gave the report to ABC, and ABC took a look at the report and decided, I don't think I'm going to hire Joe because of the information in the report. What then? What steps should the ABC take? The FCRA requires that before an employer can take any adverse action not to hire, not to promote, or not to terminate, based on information in the employment background or investigative report, the employer must give the applicant or employee what the FTC refers to as advance notice of the contemplated action, along with a copy of the report that the employer is relying upon to make this decision, and as well as a summary of the consumer rights under the Federal Reporting Act. Now, by giving the advance notice, the applicant employee is then given an opportunity in a reasonable period of time, which is generally 5 days, to review the report and explain any negative information. And during this time period, the FTC recommends that the employer take no action to don't hire anyone, not take any action that can be considered an adverse action, and because they need to allow the applicant or the employee to explain what happened. So the employee would take a look at it and say, yes, I did flunk the drug test. I smoked marijuana, and it came back that I was smoking marijuana. But this is the reason: I was a part of a government study that was sanctioned by the Trump administration that was looking at the effects that smoking marijuana would have on cataracts. So that was the reason why my drug test came back positive. So the employer is then required to take a look at the response, but not required to change his or her mind. He can go ahead and say, no, I think I'm not going to take a chance on this applicant because they flunked this drug test. I don't want any potheads in my organization. And they can go ahead and decide not to hire that individual, or they may decide to terminate someone for testing positive to a drug test. So if the employer takes the adverse action based upon the information in the consumer report, the employer must then give the applicant what's called an adverse action notice. The notice must be in writing. The notice must include the name, the address, and the telephone number of the company that created the report. And also, the notice must contain a statement telling the applicant that he or she has the right to dispute the accuracy or the completion of that report, and they have 60 days to ask for another free report. Now, just as it is important for your clients to know what steps an employer must take if they want an investigative or an employment background report and what should be in the disclosure forms, it is equally important that they know what should not be in these employment background reports. For an example, bankruptcies after 10 years, civil judgments, civil suits, record of arrest after 7 years, paid tax liens after 7 years, debt collections after 7 years should not be in a employment background report, and any other negative information except criminal convictions after 7 years. But there is at least one exception. According to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, these restrictions only apply bankruptcy after 10 years, civil suits, civil judgments, record arrests after 7 years, paid tax liens after 7 years. These restrictions only apply to consumers who are earning less than $75,000 a year. If they are earning more than $75,000 a year, these restrictions doesn't apply to them. So, and one other thing you need to know, especially for you reentry advocates out there, a criminal record review portion of a background check will include any criminal offense, which can include convictions and non-convictions, including cases that are not prosecuted or dismissed. For an example, under the Federal Credit Reporting Act, a conviction can appear on an employment background report, regardless to when it occurred. It could be 20 years old, and it could still show up unless there is a state law that's going to limit the scope of that conviction. For an example, California, Kansas, Maryland, Montana, New Mexico, New York, Washington, New Hampshire, all have limited the scope of a conviction to 7 years. And under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, non-convictions are reported for 7 years. A non-conviction could be a person being arrested and going to preliminary hearing and the prosecutor dismissing the charges. A non-conviction can stay on an employment background report for 7 years unless there is a state law that will prevent that from happening. So let's stop now and let's take a look at some of the agencies that are doing these specialty, that are creating these employment background screening reports. The CFPB reports that there are roughly about 13 agencies that conduct employment background screening checks. You should fact check the accuracy of your employment screening report when you're looking for a new job, when you're getting a promotion, you're enlisting in the military, or you think you just may be a victim of identity theft. In fact, in this COVID-19 era, it may be wise to be proactive and take a look at all of your reports, not just the ones created by Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Now, you can order a employment background screening report from Accurate by calling the number on the screen or going to its website. You can order your employment background screening report from General Information Services, which is now Hire Right, by calling the number on the screen or selecting one. Incidentally, these PowerPoint slides you will also receive the PowerPoint slides with all of the contact information on them. Also, in the materials placed in your Dropbox will be a report that was created by the CFPB that lists all of these specialty consumer reporting agencies and contact information. Now, again, it is important that you inform your clients about their right to the disclosures and the information that should be in disclosures, as well as information that should not be in the disclosure forms and these reports. Hire Right was sued in 2017 for background screening violations. You can order your employment report from ADP Screening and Selection, but know that it will only provide you with a free report if it has completed one on you within the past 2 years. Another background check vendor that I'd like to introduce you to is called CheckR, CheckR. Now, this company conducts both employment background screening and investigative reports. The reason I have it here is because CheckR counts Uber, Lyft, Instacart, Postmart, and Grubhub among the base of its customers. And we know that these agencies are out there hiring. And it's also expanding into the insurance industry, working for, it's currently now has Allstate as a customer. Check R was sued for $4 million in 2018 for employment background screening violations. You can get a copy of your report from that company by calling 844-824-3257 or going online to its website. Another agency that I would like to introduce you to is First Advantage Corp. Now, First Advantage Corp is the parent company of several nationwide specialty consumer reporting agencies that you'll hear about a little later. But the main reason that I have First Advantage here is because they manage a little known but massive database called Exteme. Extreme operates by tracking workers who were employed in the retail industry and accused of stealing, not prosecuted for stealing, not arrested for stealing, but accused of stealing or questioned for theft. Retailers across the country have helped amass this vast database of workers accused of stealing, and retailers are actually using the information to keep employees from working in the industry. You can obtain a copy of your Extreme report, or if you're interested in an employment background or investigative report from First Advantage, by calling them at 800-845-6004. Now, in the materials that's placed in the Dropbox is a guide that was created by Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. The title of it is Employment Background Check, a Job Seeker's Guide. I really like this report because included is a section on how to prepare for a background check. Now, in the era of in the COVID-19 era, when employers are limiting their risk, they are running background checks. The pool of candidates is great. I believe that this guide would be very useful for some of your clients. Another great report that I encourage every consumer to read is created by NCLC. the National Consumer Law Center. It is entitled Broken Records. And the reason that I think it's a report that you should read is because it points to the numerous mistakes, such as expunged information being included in an employment background check. The Federal Credit Reporting Act specifically states that expunged information should not be included in a background check. And also, other mistakes that these agencies make is with mixing up people with no criminal background with people with criminal backgrounds, and that information can hurt them because it'll end up on their employment background report, and they will be unable to get jobs. I want to talk to you a little bit about the challenges of getting these background reports in the COVID-19 era, and some of the challenges are to public records, the verification services, and drug screening. Now, as our country begins to open back up, public records challenges are not as great as they were back in March when we shut down. But you need to know that the Federal Credit Reporting Act places an obligation on all background check vendors to make sure that the information that they report about consumers is complete and up to date. And when background check vendors are using on national databases or online services to collect their information, someone needs to verify that information. They need to call someone at the courthouse or at DMV to check to verify that information to make sure it is up to date and it is accurate. Because just checking the databases alone is just often insufficient because the databases are not updated, and the records found could be incompleted and again outdated. Now, when it comes to work and education verification, work history and education credentials are likely still a challenge right now because there's still a lot of companies that are not open. And as you know, educational institutions have been severely affected by COVID-19. And I'm sure colleges probably have other things that they're more concerned about how they're going to bring their students back instead of trying to do educational transcript checks. So that's another challenge that's happening now, and another reason why consumers should be proactive and check these reports and make sure that the information is complete and up to date. Now, when it comes to drug testing, I'm sure that there are a lot of labs that are still open and doing drug testing, but if a person is sheltering in place, they may not be available for an in-person visit. So that's another hindrance to pushing that test through. And they may have fears of going to a drug lab for fear of being exposed to COVID-19. So let's move on and take a look at social services checks. There are at least three agencies that provide social services verification check: the Work Number, Info, and TrueWorks. Many governmental agencies that administer federal, state, or local benefits to low-income individuals and families, they use employment and verification services like the Work Number. By using the Work Number, a caseworker can sit at her desk and she can instantly check the employment and income of an applicant at intake before providing assistance or when they come in for their annual recertification. Now, as an advocate who worked for legal aid for over 21 years, a housing advocate, I've represented a lot of clients at administrative hearings when they were being terminated from the Section 8 program for fraud for having income when they didn't report it on their application. And in every case except for one, all of the information that was reported by the works number was incorrect. These individuals were a victim of identity theft. So I strongly suggest, and this is what I tell the clients that I work with, before you go in for your recertification, especially in this COVID-19 era, when they are going to be reducing, when companies, when states all over are trying to expand the safety net to help some of these unemployed individuals, they will be looking at existing programs to cut. And one of the ways that they cut is fraud. So it will be beneficial for these individuals to run a background check and do whatever they need to do to show that worker that they are a victim of fraud, a victim of ID theft rather than they're committing fraud. The work number is owned by the credit reporting agency Equifax, and it will provide an employment data report every 12 months. You can get the report by calling the number on the screen. The one good thing that I do like about the work number, if you believe your employment data report is incorrect, you can contact the work number's customer service number at 800-996-7566 and to follow dispute. When you file that dispute, all of your information is blocked, so no one can come in and get any information until the investigation is conducted, which usually takes about 30 days. Now, Info it considers itself a hybrid platform. It provides verification information not only to government agencies, but to employers, to lenders, to student and home loan providers, to rental housing providers as well. You can request your information by calling 800-247 9694 or by visiting its website. Now, before we move on to the next segment, I would like to advance the next poll question. So if you will participate, your participation will be greatly appreciated. So, true or false? If you believe that you're a victim of identity theft, check systems will allow you to place a security freeze on your consumer report. Is that true or is that false? I'll give you a, don't overthink it. I'll give you a few more seconds to get your question in. Is it true or is it false? Check systems will allow you to place a security freeze on your consumer report. Okay, let's see the results. So 72% say true, 28% say false. Well, let's advance to the next segment. Let's get into the next slide and let's take a look if that's true or false. Okay. There are at least six nationwide specialty consumer reporting agencies that report on your banking behavior. A banking history report tracks how well you handle or you manage your savings account or your checking account in the past. For an example, if you've overdrawn your account, you've had account closed because you didn't pay overdraft or other banking fees, or you were suspected of committing fraud, your banking history report would include this information. You can order your annual disclosure report and score. Don't forget about score from Check Systems by calling the number on the screen or going to Check Systems website, which is www.checksystems.com. Now, your Check Systems risk score can range anywhere from 100 to 899, and it is used by Check Systems to predict how well a consumer will manage his account. Now, according to Bank Rate, there are other outlier scores codes that will pop up when Check System reviews your banking history. For an example, a 999A score means that the Social Security number that the applicant is using to apply for a checking account belongs to someone that's deceased. Now, I've worked with other clients in the past, and they've indicated to me that the Social Security Administration has reused the Social Security number, and it was given to a child, and they had problems filing a tax return because it was coming up as being belonging to someone that's deceased. Now, a 999 code means that check system does not have the information about that banking applicant to generate a score. But my question to you is, do you know what your check system score is? Do you know what check system report is saying about you? Now, if you believe you are a victim of identity theft, check systems will allow you to place a security freeze on your consumer report, but the freeze would generally prohibit a consumer reporting agency from releasing any information that's in your file without your express authorization. But note one thing, if you go to Check Systems website, it will state that your Check Systems freeze requirements will not apply to any company trying to offer you a pre-approved credit offer or any bank that wants to look at your history. So for those of you who said true, you are correct. Check systems will place a security freeze on your report, but there are certain requirements that won't apply. If you're denied a checking account because of incorrect information in your check system report, this is considered an adverse action, and you can file a dispute with both check system and the company that put the information on. Now, you can order your consumer disclosure report from Early Warning Services by calling 800 and selecting option 4. Early Warning is co-owned by Bank of America, Capital One, Chase, Wells Fargo, US, PNC Bank, and its sole function is to detect and prevent fraud associated with a bank account and payment transaction. For an example, while check systems and telechecks, yes, telecheck is still alive and kicking, while they report on bank mismanagement, such as overdraft or bounce checks, Early warning service is more concerned with bank fraud, forgery, and counterfeit checks. Early warning system does not create a score, the type of score that check system creates, but it does create a deposit score. And this deposit score uses your historical banking and deposit information to estimate your risk level when you're opening up a new account. It's almost worth it to find out what those scores are, to go to check systems and early warnings and just order your score so you'll know what these agencies are saying about you. Now, you can request a copy of your deposit and your score by calling the number on the screen, going to the website, downloading and filling out a disclosure form and mailing it and returning it to the agencies. You can order your free disclosure form from report from telecheck services by calling 800-366-2425 or visiting telecheck on this website. Now, telecheck maintains a database of return checks, and it provides check authorization and verification to its members. Now, CrossCheck is a little bit of a different animal. CrossCheck is there on your screen. You can get your report from CrossCheck by calling the number that's on the screen or visiting its website. CrossCheck is more of a guarantee services for automobile sales and repair, building supply. For an example, you go in a Ford Motor Company and you write a check for $5,000 for your down payment on the vehicle. Uh, Ford Motor would then go to CrossCheck. CrossCheck will guarantee that check, meaning that Ford would get his $5,000, but if the check bounced, then CrossCheck will come after you for that information. Let's move on to your medical history report. Now, the Medical Information Bureau, or MIB, has been a subject of ongoing controversy since the 1970s, when it was hauled before Congress to explain why consumer medical information was being used in insurance underwriting. Now, MIB owns the largest database of reported medical information in North America, but it collects more than just medical information on consumers. Why? Because your personal habits, whether you smoke, whether you drink, if you're a pole dancer, and your lifestyle choices are important to insurance companies. After all, when you purchase a life insurance company, what is the insurance company doing? The insurance company is trying to gauge your risk. They're trying to calculate the probability of your death before investing in you. So they need to know if you smoke, if you drink, are you a mountain climber, are you a bungee jumper, so that they can calculate the probability of your death. In Vegas, they call it setting the spread. In the insurance industry, they call it underwriting. Now, your MIB files just don't contain your exact medical information like test results or x-rays. Instead, within the MIB database are codes. There are over 200 codes that commonly report on conditions like your height, your weight, your blood pressure, your EKG reading, your lab reports. And there are also codes that signify diabetes, heart problems, and gender. Some of the codes are very, very detailed. For an example, MIB has about five separate codes for HIV, AIDS, and they are used to identify the source of the infection. Your medical specialty reports are extremely important because this is what insurance companies use when they're determining your rates and whether to improve your application for any kind of insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, a long term care insurance. And what if you are the victim of medical identity theft and your application is denied because there's negative information in your report that had nothing to do with you? So you should fact check the accuracy of your medical history report, your credit report for your health records before you apply for private insurance, life insurance, long-term care or critical illness insurance, and disability insurance. You can get a copy of that report by calling 866-692-6901 or going to MIB's website. Now, everyone will not have a consumer file with MIB. If you have applied individually for life, health, disability income, long term care, or critical care insurance within the last 7 years, then it's likely MIB will have a report on you, especially if the company that which you apply for insurance is an MIB member. On the other hand, if it's been more than 7 years since you applied for insurance, or you have what they call employer sponsor group insurance, or guarantee issued insurance, or you got or ACA based insurance, then MIB may not have a file on you. But don't assume they don't have a file on you. Try and get a copy of your report. Nothing beats a failure but a try. Let them tell you there is no report. Again, your medical specialty reports are very important because this is what insurance companies use when they determine your rates and whether or not they're going to approve your application for insurance. Now, another thing you need to know, insurance company also track your medicine cabinet. They track your medicine cabinet through what's called your pharmacy history report. Your pharmacy history report is created by IntelliScript. You can get a copy of that report by calling the number on the screen, 877-211-4816. But let me tell you a little bit about IntelliScript. And Telescript is a data service that provides individual medical profiles that contain 7 years of your prescription drug purchase histories. And they provide these to insurance companies when you apply for insurance. Your pharmacy history report can include dosage, number of refills from for the past 7 years. Your report can also contain for each drug that you are taking the name and the address of the dispensing pharmacy, as well as the name of the prescribing doctor, including his specialty. Your medical IntelliScript, what else they will do? They will analyze all the drugs that you are taking, and they will create a map of map of the risk levels associated with each drug. Now, before you ask me how is IntelliScript getting their hands on all your information, well, again, once you apply for insurance, you sign an authorization. The authorization goes to the insurance company. Insurance company sends the authorization to IntelliScript. They go to pharmacy benefit managers, pharmacies, and health insurance companies to get the information on your drug history. But there's other ways that they can get your information. CVS, Rite Aids, and Walgreens have all paid millions of dollars in settlement. Why? For disposing private patient information improperly. So think twice before you give your pharmacy, your doctor's office, your whole entire social security number, credit card information. Now, included in the materials in the Dropbox is an interesting article that was created by Consumer Reports. It's called Your Prescriptions Are Not a Secret. It's a couple of years old, but it is a good report to read. Now let's move on to insurance claims. The CFPB reports that there are at least four nationwide consumer reporting agencies that report on insurance claims. If you've ever switched insurance companies and wonder how your new company was aware of previous accidents or claims, it may be thanks to one of these agencies. Insurance companies routinely track and share information about their policyholders through two databases, the Comprehensive Loss Insurance Exchange, or CLUE, and CLUE is owned by LexisNexis, or through your 8 Plus report. Again, your past claims help insurance companies decide how much they're going to charge you for a policy. And if a company determined that the odds of you filing future claims is really, really high, it may deny your application or it may charge you extremely high premium. Remember, in Vegas, it's called setting a spread. In insurance company, it's called underwriting. You should fact check the accuracy of your personal property or automobile insurance report for accuracy before shopping, applying, or renewing a new homeowner's or automobile insurance policy. Or if you think you're a victim of identity theft, you can order your clue report by calling the number on the screen, and when or visiting the website, you can order your personal property or your auto report, or both at the same time. You can order your A Plus property report by calling the number on the screen and choosing option one, or visiting the website at www.aplus.com. Now, similar to Clue, A Plus collects and reports insurance claims and loss history associated with home and automobile or personal property. Now, you can order a report from driver's history by calling the number on the screen. Note that driver's history is owned by TransUnion, and it will provide you with a free copy of your consumer disclosure report only if adverse action was taken against you as a result of information in your driver's report. Um, and again, these reports it's not uncommon that the reports contain mistakes. So the reason that you want to get your report, because there could be inaccurate information included in your report. It could include information about someone else's property. It can include information about a claim that you didn't file with your insurance company. So before we move on, let's launch the next poll question. Okay, a tenant screening report can include a credit report, a criminal background check, and a 50-state eviction history. I am interested in knowing what you think. Is that true or is that false? Couple more minutes, couple more seconds. Is it true or is it false? A tenant screening report can include a credit report, a criminal background check, and a 50-state eviction history. Let's check the results. Oh, so 85 think it's true, and 15% think it's false. Okay, let's move into the next segment, and we'll get the answer to that question. So the CFPB lists that there are about 7 nationwide specialty consumer reporting agencies that provide tenant screening background reports. Similar to your employment background reports, these reports can include information on bankruptcies, on judgments, on liens. It will check the sex offenders database, your criminal history, your eviction, and it will also look for your eviction history, and then would do employment verifications. Landlords almost always run tenant screenings to ensure that they don't get stuck with a bad tenant. You can order your tenant history report from Experian Rent Bureau by calling the number on the screen or by visiting its website. Now, Experian Rent Bureau, it collects reports on rent payment history. They collect information from data from property owners, from resident real estate managers, from electronic rent payment services, and also from collection companies. Another screening company is CoreLogic. CoreLogic, First Advantage is the parent company of CoreLogic, and it's one of the ones that I discussed back during the employment background checks. You can order your tenant history report from CoreLogic by calling 800 815-8664 and selection option 1. Now, in addition to reporting information regarding landlord-tenant actions such as prior evictions, CoreLogic will also do an intensive background check to check the identity of the individual applying for the rental unit. They will look at criminal records, court judgment. They will also look for prison sentences, presence on the government managed sex offender site, terrorist database. You can order your tenant history report from TransUnion screening solution or Smart Right by calling the number on the screen. TransUnion or Smart Move will generate a detailed screening package, which will include a credit report, a criminal background check, and a 50-state eviction history. So if you said the answer is true, you are correct. Smart Move will also conduct a search of the most wanted database as well as the national sex offender database. It would also provide records on on court judgments, failure to pay rent, and warrants of eviction. But in contrast to CoreLogic, CoreLogic, Smart Move will also provide landlords with what's called a residential risk screening, and they will also make lease recommendations to landlords and real estate managers. So let's move on to low income and sub prime agencies. The CFPB reports that there are at least three specialty consumer reporting agencies, Clarity Services, CoreLogic, and DataX, that collect and maintain information on consumers when they use alternative financial services like payday loans, auto title loans, and small installment loans. Clarity Services, which is owned by Experian, it not only cover consumer who uses alternative financial services, but those within files, consumers with less than 4 items in their credit report. Clarity Services will also provide you with one free credit report a month, and they use the score to predict the risk of default. So you can get your report from Clarity Service by calling 866-390-3114. Uh, Data X is owned by Equifax, and you can order your consumer disclosure report for them by calling the number on the screen or visiting its website. You can also order your report from Telecheck by calling the number on the screen. Uh, the the National Consumers Telecom and Utility Exchange. Now, this is a consumer reporting agency that maintains consumer data that's reported by utility services that can include cell phones, long distance, cable, television services, internet services, your providers of electric, gas, and water services. If you've ever had to pay a huge deposit for one of these services, it could be because there's negative information about you in this database. This database is managed by Equifax, and you can obtain a free copy of your report by calling 866-394-5186. Now, the last of the reports that I need to discuss with you quickly are called supplementary reports. And the reason that they are called supplementary reports is because they boast that they uncover information and that's not included in your Experian TransUnion Equifax report. Launched in 2011, CoreLogic claims that it helped lenders mitigate their risk by uncovering additional debt obligation that's owed by the consumer, and and that the big three failed to pick up. So you can order your report from CoreLogic by calling the number on the screen. CoreLogic, it collects and reports on personal data such as property ownership, home loan obligation, tax payment status, collection accounts, bankruptcy liens, child support obligations. You can order your credit report from Innovus, and Innovus is considered the fourth credit reporting agency behind the big three, by mail, by phone, or in person if you live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Innovus is also known for collecting information similar to that's collected by the big three, but it will also also include a list of companies that have reviewed your Novus report. You can get a copy of your disclosure report from Sage Screens by going to its website. Now, in contrast to Novus Core, and CoreLogic, Sage Stream provides consumer reports and credit scores for its clients. And your Sage Screen score can range anywhere from 100 to 900, and it is used by lenders to predict how well you're going to repay back a loan. So, but if you are checking, and if you are checking any of these specialty consumer reports for the first time, please consider checking your full file disclosure report. This report is created by LexisNexis, and even a fairly uneventful report can contain 50 pages. What's included in the report would be three other reports that's also created by LexisNexis. One is called a personal report. Included in your full disclosure report would be information that's out there in the public about you, and information is pulled for other consumer files. For an example, your full disclosure report contains information on the insurance claim, your banking information, your current insurance carrier, your employment information, your criminal records, and your personal files. Whether you've been evicted, all of that can be included in your full disclosure file. Another report that can be included with your full disclosure file is what's called a person report. Now, a person report will include information like the neighborhood that you live in, the economic makeup of that neighborhood that you live in, your next door neighbor's name, your children's name, if you have people that you associate with. So when we talked about that investigative check, if you were thinking, well, they could only call the persons that I put on that application for references, that's not true. They can get a copy of your person report, and they can get the name of your neighbors or individuals that you associate with, and they can contact them by getting a copy of that report. You can you can obtain a copy of your LexisNexis report by going to its website. You can get an electronic copy by going to the website, or you can get a copy by calling 866-897-8126. Launch our last poll question and wrap things up. Because of COVID-19, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax would offer all consumers free weekly credit reports through April 2021. What do you think? Is that true or is that false? Don't overthink it. Is that true or is that false? Let's take a look at the results. 50% says true, 50% says false. Well, actually, that is true. As of April 20th this year, the big three, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, began offering free credit reports weekly so that consumers can monitor their financial health and any changes brought along by COVID-19. So if you're making deals with those creditors, and if you made an agreement with those creditors, they gave you an accommodation, you want to make sure that they're not reporting things that they promised they wouldn't report. Let's move on to the next segment. So let's take a look how the CARES Act, how it is helping the average Joe six-pack weather this, how it's helping um, the average Joe sick pack protect their credit through this COVID-19 crisis? Well, according to NOLA, which is a legal publication, under the under the amended Federal Credit Reporting Act, the CARES Act, actually what it did was it amended the Federal Credit Reporting Act. And under the amendments, if a lender or creditor provides any type of accommodation to a consumer because the consumer was affected by COVID-19, they lost their job or they were furloughed, they're not working, that creditor must report their account as current to the credit reporting agencies as long as they were not delinquent, already delinquent on the payments before COVID-19 hit. Specifically, the creditor must continue to report your debt as current, or if you are up to date. If they offer to defer one or more payments, to let you make partial payments, to forbear any delinquent payments, or to modify your loan or a contract. But in order to not be reported as delinquent, you must reach this agreement with your lenders. And consumers are encouraged not to unilaterally stop making any payments saying I was affected by COVID, or delay any payments without talking to your lender first. If you aren't able to work on an agreement with a creditor and you fall behind on those payments, they can report you as being delinquent. Included in the materials in the Dropbox is an article that was created by NOLO on credit protection under the Corona CARES Act, and also an article that was written by Chi Wu of the National Consumer Law on enforcing the CARES Credit Reporting Act. Let's just briefly move on to your rights. As I said earlier, FACTA gave you a right to get a free credit report every 12 months. But starting this year, as a result of the settlement between Equifax and FTC, after the Equifax data breach that compromised the personal information of 147 consumers, consumers now can get 6 additional credit reports a year. So in addition to the 3 that you get under the amendment to the Federal Credit Reporting Act of 2003, you get if you go to the Equifax website and register, you can get 6 additional credit reports. Also, if you are anytime an adverse action is taken against you, if you're denied insurance, credit, or employment because of information in your credit file, this is an adverse action and you are entitled to a free credit report, but only if you requested from the agency that report had the adverse action. You're entitled to a free credit report every year if you are unemployed and you're looking for a job within the next 60 days. If you're on welfare, you're entitled to a free report. You also have the right to dispute any information that's in your specialty consumer reports, just like you will dispute information with the big 3. You have the right to complain. If you think that one of those specialty consumer reporting agencies is not reporting your information correctly, you contacted them, you complain, you file a dispute, and they still have not corrected the information, you have the right to complain to the FTC. You can go to their website. You have the right to sue, and you also have the right to sue. The big 3 information is there on the screen. You can contact them if you want to get a credit report, but your free credit report is from annualcreditreport.com, and that number there is on the screen. So let's move on and take questions.
Hey, Linda. So let's start from the top. Diana Gonzalez had a question of, I was informed that landlords have a blacklist for tenants who owe money. Can you elaborate on this blacklist and does it affect our credit report?
I'm not aware of, I'm sure they do. I'm sure there's somewhere someone has a blacklist, but it shouldn't impact your credit report. I'm not aware of a blacklist, but I would strongly suggest that all of the agencies that create tenant history reports, you contact them and ask them for a copy of your report. If they don't have any information on you, great. But if they do, you want to get that information and you want to look at it carefully and dispute anything that's inaccurate. Remember when we had the housing turned down, when individuals were losing their housing because the market, or a lot of a lot of incidents of identity theft happened when individuals were renting apartments in other individuals' name. So that's another reason why you want to check each and every report to make sure to see if they have a report on you.
Great. And Amanda has 2 questions. If I'm never late on my rent, is that reported on my credit report? And how do we know if our employers or potential employers requested our reports?
Well, if you're never late on your rent, there should not be late rent on your rental history. But I strongly suggest you get a copy of those rental history reports. They are free. It's not going to cost you anything but time. Get a copy of those rental history reports. How you will know that your employer is contacting a employment background and investigation report on you because he or she must get your permission. They cannot run an background or investigative report on you without your permission.
Great. Karen has a question of what about agencies that state, quote, not a credit reporting agency, like the identity verification companies? Does the FCRA apply to them? If not, how do you make them delete incorrect information and keep it out?
Repeat that.
It says, what about agencies that state not a credit reporting agency, like the identity verification companies? Does the FCRA apply to them? If not, how do you make them delete incorrect information?
Um, the FCRA only applies to credit reporting agencies. If they are not a credit reporting agency, they have not been designated a credit reporting agency by the FCRA will not apply. You would have to look at your state law. For an example, California has a very strong privacy law that requires agencies that are collecting information on you. You have the right to say, "I don't want you to sell my information. I want you to delete my information." So you may need to look the state law.
The next question, do they have to do that if they use a credit report or only if they use these investigative reports?
Investigative reports fall under investigative reports that I am speaking of fall under the Federal Credit Reporting Act. And that the investigative report that falls on the Federal Credit Report Act is different is if a person is being investigated by his or her employer for misconduct. But the investigative reports fall under the Federal Credit Reporting Act, and anyone that wants an investigative report must comply with that act. State other verification agencies, if they are not consumer reporting agencies, they do not fall under the Federal Credit Reporting Act.
Great.
That makes Was that clear?
Let's move on to the next question. If a re-entry person, if the housing provider rejects their application, do they have to give a reason?
Yes, yes, uh, yes. What will happen is they would get a notice of adverse action. Okay. And the notice of adverse action will have the name and the address and the telephone number of the consumer reporting agencies that created that report that the landlord rely on. And in that notice, it will tell them that they have a right to get a copy of that report. So when they get a copy of that report, they will see the reasons, everything that was listed, what the landlord relied on.
Let's see. Um, Charlene wants to know, are there costs for any of these reports?
These reports are free once a year. They are free once a year. Now if you want two a year, you may have to pay for the second one, but you are entitled to a free report once a year from all of these credit reporting agencies.
Okay. Oh, do the tenant screening reports differentiate between private and HUD rentals?
No.
Okay. Let's see. If you pull your credit report from annualcreditreport.com, will these specialty pulls show up on the inquiry listing?
No. www.annualcreditreport.com is only going to report what Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. That's it. You go to annualwcreditreport.com to get a copy of your Experian report, your Equifax, or your TransUnion report. It has nothing to do with the specialty consumer reports.
Okay. In regards to because of COVID-19, you can pull it once a week. This person wants to know, I've been trying to get 2 credit reports in 1 week. Is it weekly, just one every week?
You get one from the 3 every week.
Do the weekly reports contain credit scores from Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax?
No.
Let's see. This person says, it sounds really daunting having to check dozens of different reports. Any practical advice on what to tell clients?
Yes, start with as I said, start with your full disclosure report start with your full disclosure report. Start there. If you start with that report, because it's going to pull information from your other reports. So start there with your full disclosure report from LexisNexis. Go to your LexisNexis website. LexisNexis will have about 3 reports that is already created on you, and it will also pull reports from the other specialty consumer reporting agency that I discussed. For an example, again, it's going to have your insurance information, your banking information. It's going to have your employment verification. It's going to have information from your personal report, like the name of your next door neighbor, your children's name. So start with your LexisNexis full disclosure report and move out from there.
Okay, what are your recommendations for checking reports for minors? Thinking of kids in foster care, for example, who may have had their ID compromised by others in the past.
Well, first of all, there should not be a consumer report on a minor. You will start with Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. With credit reporting, you can put a freeze on a minor's credit report. You can put a security freeze on a minor's credit report. But I would start with Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. I will send them a letter and say, I think that this minor may be a victim of identity theft. Could you please check their files to see if there's any information? If there's no information, great, but put a freeze on the key, if they in the system, put a freeze on their report. But start with Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax.
This next one's interesting. Can parents check on the other reports on their children, for example, medical history reports and prescription reports?
I'm sure they can, but the child should not have one. But if you want to check to see if they have one, you should write a letter and say that I think that my child may be a victim of identity theft. Could you check your database to see if you have any information on this child?
Okay. Um, Amy wants to know, in the past, I have tried to request the credit reports, but they don't make it easy, and I have to end up paying.
No, then you went to the wrong site. You go to www.annualcreditreport.com. You are required to get a free report. If you cannot get a free report from that site, which I've never heard anyone not being able to, then you need to file a complaint with the CFPB.
Okay. Um, I think we're going to get to 2 more and then that's it. If I'm applying for a business loan from a local bank, other than a credit report from one of or all of the big 3, what other specialty reports might a lender be looking at?
I guess it depend on the lender. It will depend on the lender. If it's alternative financial products, the lender will probably be looking at Clarity Services or CoreLogic or Data X. It depends on the lender.
Can someone with power of attorney obtain these reports for relatives they are caring for?
Yes. But they would have to submit a copy of with all of these reports, you would have to prove who you are. So you're going to have identification to get any of these reports and answer certain questions like you do when you try and get one from Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. So if you have a power of attorney over a particular individual that says that you can check their reports, you should be able to use that to get their reports. In fact, that's what I used to check my mother's reports when she was living. I used a power of attorney to check to make sure that she wasn't a victim of identity theft. But if you think you have an individual that could be a victim of identity theft, by all means, put a freeze on their credit file.
Does checking your annual report, reduce your credit score?
No, it has absolutely nothing to do with reducing your credit score. There are 2 types of inquiries that go in your report: a soft and a hard. A soft inquiry is when you check your credit report. A hard inquiry is when you apply for credit and a creditor is looking at your report. Soft inquiries have no impact on your credit score whatsoever.
Okay, next question was, Wondering why there are only phone numbers provided. Do they not have websites that can be used by consumers to access the reports?
Yes, you can go onto their website. Um, if you go to our website and you download the our specialty consumer report fact sheet, not only will there be telephone numbers for contacts, but there also will be website information. In the materials placed in your Dropbox is a list of specialty consumer reports that was compiled by the CFPB, and in that information will be information where you can go onto their website. Now, when FACTA was passed, it required the big three to have a central place for you to go and get all of those reports. But for the nationwide consumer reports, they didn't have that requirement. The only thing that they're required to do is provide a toll-free number. Most have done more, but all they're required to do is provide a toll-free number.
Great. Next question is, are there federal guidelines that require a high level of encryption for these files? What keeps hackers from stealing this information?
Nothing. Didn't you hear me say that Experian, the hacking Experience exposed 147 million consumers? I think they're trying to shore that up now, especially I'm sorry, the Equifax breach. But as far as I know, nothing.
Okay, next question is, are any of these additional reports uh, that a consumer requests counted as a derogatory mark on Nexus?
On Nexus.
The Nexus Lexus.
Okay. If getting a copy, I don't really understand the question. Let me answer it the way what I think you're saying. To get a copy of your report is not going to be a negative mark on you whatsoever. You are entitled, by law, you're entitled to a free copy of these reports, and they cannot penalize you because you are exercising your rights under law to get a copy of the report. Um, some agencies are going to tell you they don't have any information on you. That's good. But next year, ask them again. But it shouldn't be any negative information in your file because you requested a report. That's your right under law.
Great. One other one is, how does the COVID-19 CARES Act cover people who are in a bankruptcy? Will special arrangements be covered with mortgage lenders, etc., for them too?
There is information in the CARES Act that covers mortgage lenders. In the article that I put in your Dropbox that was prepared by Nolo, there is an explanation about that in there. For the purpose of this report, I just focus on credit reporting, but there is something in it. But as far as bankruptcies, I don't think there is any protection in the CARES Act that protect you if you're in bankruptcy, but don't quote me on that. Again, the article on the CARES Act that was created by Nolo is going to be in your Dropbox and made available to you.
Okay, let's see. The next one is, do employers have to disclose the type of background check they do, like whether it will be investigative or not, or do they just have to disclose the fact that they will do one?
No, as I said before, if if a employer is going to do an employment background check, first they have to get your permission, then they have to give you certain disclosure forms. And those disclosure forms, it will tell you in those disclosures that they're going to do an employment background check, and that information that they uncover could be used for the decision of whether they're going to hire or promote or terminate you. With the investigative report, they must clearly state that they're getting ready to do personal interviews about information about your character, about your reputation in the community. And they're going to do it through personal interviews. It will be clear to you that they're going to talk to your ex-wife or your ex-husband or neighbors or associates people that you know. So it must be clear. So they tell you if they're going to do the employment or the investigative, and how you know the difference. The investigative is based upon personal interviews. The employment is based upon checking different databases like the employment, like motor vehicle, verifying your employment, verifying your education.
Okay, and this is the last one that I'm going to read out is, could Consumer Reports and Consumer Action and CFPB work together to get legislation passed to require stronger encryption? Also, can you work toward a mandatory freeze on reports with an opt-in option for consumers who want their info shared?
Consumer Action is constantly working with, we are partners with a lot of different agencies. We're signing on to support letters 2, 6, and 7 times a day. So we are already in that arena working to make things better for consumers, and we will continue to do so to the day. To the day we close our doors, we will continue to do so.
Great. Let's hand this over to any Twitter questions.
Yeah, I'll just share one question from Twitter. And as you reminded everyone, Linda, we will be on Twitter for the next half hour. If anyone has additional questions or wants more clarification, join us there. But one quick question now. Someone used my driver's license number to write a check at a store that I have never shopped at. I found out when trying to open a new bank account. So should I check my checking scores?
You should check your checks. Wait a minute. Did the check bounce? Um, you should check your check systems report. Yes, you should check your check systems report. Also, you may want to do a DMV check to see if anyone is using your driver's license for other purposes. So, in a case like that, I would say yes, you need to check all of your reports to make, because that's a red flag that you could be a victim of identity theft, and you need to really clear that up as soon as possible.
Thank you, Linda. And please follow the hashtag specialty consumer reports if you want to have additional questions answered. Thank you.
Let me go to our last screen. If you're interested in making a contribution, the information is there on the screen. Is there any more questions?
Not here.
Okay, thank you so very much for attending the webinar. I hope the information was useful to you. If you have any additional questions, we will be on Twitter for the next 30 minutes, or you can email me at linda.williams at consumer-action.org. Thank you for joining us.